This is Corinne.
And this is Ayanni.
And you're listening to Sex, Love, Literature, a pop culture podcast where we take a semi-scholarly look at why
and how
the sex stuff in media matters.
We're taking a trip back in time this episode to do a deep dive on the classic fairy tale retelling Ever After, a Cinderella Story, which features the one and only Drew Barrymore.
We consider what makes something a Cinderella story and how Ever After maps onto those criteria, our reactions to the main romance, and, of course, the tour de force performance that is Angelica Huston as the Baroness Rodmilla de Ghent.
If you've loved Ever After since you were little, like Corinne, or maybe have never seen it before, like me, follow us and let us know on Instagram, Tumblr, and Blue Sky at Sex Love Lit Podcast.
And don't forget to subscribe to and rate our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any of your other favorite podcast platforms.
Okay, let's dive in. Hello, SLL listeners. Welcome to another episode of Sex, Love, Literature. As always, we are very excited that you decided to join us today for our episode. I'm laughing because Corinne and I were being very boring and we're just talking about the weather before this. And now I keep looking out the window and I'm like, weather,
And pulling out the strange accents to get us started with.
Sometimes I need to do the strange accents to I was going to say get me going, but then that makes it sound really weird. It's not that kind of show, not that kind of podcast. Oh,
all right, then.
Yeah, really off to a strong start. So the last couple of episodes, we've been opening with a little bit of starting business. And we're going to do that again this episode because if all goes according to plan, this episode will be dropping the weekend of Romance in CNY, which is a romance author signing event that Corinne and I are, depending on when you're listening, currently in attendance. We are doing a kind of day-long live podcasting experience, which we are very excited about, in part because there will be dogs. We're also going to be doing some author interviews and some other kind of games with the audience, so we're really excited about that. And if you are listening to this episode because you met us at Romance in CNY, maybe grabbed one of our exclusive Romance in CNY stickers that are only going to be printed for the event, then welcome to Sex, Love, Literature. And we're so excited to have you, and we're so excited that you hung out with us that weekend. Some other super small, quick pieces of business. Our listener survey is still open until April 30th, so if you haven't filled that out yet, please go do it. I'll put a link in the show notes so it'll be easily accessible. And then last but not least, if you didn't get a chance to see us at Romance in CNY, oh, guess what? You have another lucky chance to see your SLO girlies in person. We are going to be at Romanticon, which is in Connecticut, the con, 2 C's for Connecticut, if you didn't pick up on that. We are also going to be doing some live podcasting there and a little bit of in the crowd Vox Poppy stuff. And we'll also have stickers and bookmarks and all that kind of fun stuff too with us. So I don't know. I'm excited to see people in person. You haven't done one of these things before. So you don't get to, or you haven't had a chance to meet our listeners one-on-one yet, Corinne.
I have not. I mean, I've had my students be like, hey, I listened to your podcast, and been like, different. Oh.
That's a whole nother can of worms.
Yeah, there's a different foundational relationship there.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you this, and then we can get into our favorite segment of the show. But what is one thing you are excited about getting to meet listeners in person?
I am excited to see that they are real people as opposed to an imagined audience that it's hey, listeners, but I don't know what that means. I mean, I know it means my mother to some degree, but other people besides my mom.
I don't know. Something about us being too women in our 30s being hi Corinne, hi Mrs. Corinne's mom on the podcast. It's
Dr. Corinne's mom.
Oh, sorry, yes, sorry. Dr. Corinne's mom, you're absolutely correct. I will put some respect on her name.
What are you looking forward to, Ayanni?
Honestly, I get a little bit of a high when people are like, oh my god, your bookmarks are so cute. I'm like, yes, they are. I made them. so I really like giving people like SLL merch, and then am kind of excited to know that they're out there in the world putting our stickers on things and using bookmarks and things like that. So that gives me a little bit of a jolt, which I think is nice.
Very fun.
Yeah. So we'll ride that wave of us feeling good about getting to meet our listeners in person to transition to our favorite opening segment of What's Sparking Joy. Corinne, what is What's Sparking Joy?
What's Sparking Joy is when we talk about something that we are currently watching, reading, or listening to that is currently sparking joy for us. So, Ayanni, what is sparking joy for you?
So, what's sparking joy for me is The Residence on Netflix. I think I messaged you about this, Corinne, last week, right? As of recording. Yeah. Maybe till the day. When I tell you I mainlined this series, I just kind of injected it into my veins and was like, I need to have it all right now. This was one of those moments where binge watching makes a lot of sense. Like, I could have watched this show over the course of weeks, right? But I just kind of needed it all right there in that moment. So just for a super quick synopsis, The Residence is a murder mystery comedy that takes place at the White House. A person is murdered at the White House during a state dinner, and the greatest detective in the world, Cordelia Cupp, comes to solve the mystery on behalf of the Washington Police Department. So it's a lot of fun. I really, really enjoyed it. I kind of don't want to talk too much about it because number one, it's new. So I absolutely don't want to give any spoilers, but also it was one of those things where I didn't know a lot about it going in, except for that Cordelia Cupp was amazing. And that's kind of all I needed to get through the show. So that's what I'll tell folks is the acting is amazing. I really enjoyed it. It was really funny. Randall Park is in it once again as an FBI agent, which I personally thought was hilarious. And yeah, so just for some context, it is in the same kind of vein as like Knives Out or the classic Clue movie, that kind of like quirky, irreverent, someone has died, but we're going to have fun figuring out how it happened kind of a story. So I recommend The Residence. I think you should check it out. It's on Netflix, and the episodes are maybe 50-ish minutes, but yeah, I mainlined it. It was really good.
Sounds great. So what is sparking joy for me is actually in line with my goal for the year, which was to read more YA fantasy.
Oh, look at you.
I just finished reading Six Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. It came out in 2021. So right in that window of things that I missed, I think. But it is a retelling of The Wild Swans, so the fairy tale where young princess's 6 brothers are turned into swans by her stepmother. And then she has to be silent in order to break the curse. Lim combines that with The Tale of the Bamboo Cutter. So it's in a Japanese-esque fantasy world, and I really liked it. It was really good. It did not, like, necessarily blow my mind, but I mean, just because, like, that was one of my favorite fairy tales to read retellings of for a while.
Yeah, I was going to say there was one that you wrote about in your diss, right?
Yeah. So I wrote about Daughter of the Forest by Juliet Marillier in my diss. That one came out in, like, 1999-ish. And this, like, totally different take, in part because it's cranes instead of swans. But it was really good. I really liked it. Would recommend. It was a nice, easy read. And then I am cheating and giving a second thing that is sparking joy for me.
It's okay. I feel like cheating during sparking joy is fine.
Okay,
more joy is not bad.
But so this is, I can't just keep talking about the Wheel of Time.
Yes,
but,
you can.
Okay, so the Wheel of Time season 3 is continuing to spark joy for me. But specifically, there is a song that they sing in, I believe it is episode 6 of the season, called The Hills of Tanchico, which I did not know I needed in my life. It is essentially a really bawdy sea shanty where they like get up on the table and like sing, and there's like a whole situation where you don't know if the character who sings it is gonna be able to, and then she like busts it out and you see her realize about a line into the song, oh, this is about boobs. So I will give you a sample of the lyrics.
Please, please.
When one's not enough and three is too many, two brings a man to his knees. So I'm not going to sing it for both for copyright reasons and because I do not have a voice that this character and actress has. But the Hills of Tanchico, excellent. Impossible to listen to without like wanting to dance and sing along. It is so fun and so good.
So it sounds like this one is going on our Sparking Joy playlist if it's on Spotify.
Yes. So yep, the Hills of Tanchico are sparking joy for me, and by that I mean the song.
Uh-huh. You walked right into that one.
I did.
Well, that was an excellent cheat of a second Sparking Joy. That brought me a lot of joy, and I'm excited to go listen. Oh, wait. I don't need the context of the show to listen to it and enjoy it, right?
Oh, no. I will send you the reel of the scene, and then we can also link that in the show notes.
Awesome. I love that for us and for everyone that's listening right now. You're welcome. We do it for you. As you heard in the opening, we are talking about the, would it be fair to say, classic fairy tale retelling? Ever After?
Yeah, I think we can call it a classic at this point.
That raises the question of how much time has to pass before something becomes a classic, but that we're not going to cover that today. However, we're talking about Ever After, which came out in 1998, so a year after the book you just talked about in 99, or a year before, excuse me, that's how time works.
That's how time works.
That's how time works. And part of the reason that we're talking about it is Corinne and I, a little while ago, were like thinking that we wanted the episode for Romance and CNY to kind of be a look at a classic romantic comedy, right? So, or not romantic comedy, romance film, right?
Yeah.
So we were looking through like a list of the top 100 romance films or whatever. And I was like, oh, Ever After. I've never seen Ever After. And Corinne was like, what? Because you loved this film. Yeah?
I did. So I had an obsession with fairy tale retellings growing up. So my first What's Sparking Joy was actually very thematic for the episode. I was going to say,
this is one of those things that's just been consistent for you, huh?
Yeah, been consistent from the beginning. There's like another version of the multiverse in which I'm a fairy tale and folklore scholar. There are even less jobs in that than in children's literature, though. So, know. That said, this movie, I don't even remember the first time I saw it. I just like remember really, really loving it growing up, and it's really good.
Well, that sums it up. So that's the end of the episode, everybody. Thanks so much. It was really good. But joking aside, apparently it has a 91% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, even after all these years that people could go and like vote it down. Wait, is that 91% from the critics?
91% from critics. It's 84% from audiences.
Okay. I mean, that's still really good for an old movie that people could go back to and be like, this is old. I don't like it anymore. You know?
Mm-hmm.
To give you all a little bit of a plot summary, for those of you who have not seen Ever After, if you're like me and you're like, what is this movie? So this plot summary has been modified from Rotten Tomatoes. Thank you, Rotten Tomatoes. This updated adaptation of the classic fairy tale Cinderella tells the story of Danielle, a vibrant young woman who is forced into servitude after the death of her father. Danielle's stepmother, Baroness Rodmilla de Ghent, is a heartless woman who forces Danielle to do the cooking and the cleaning while she tries to marry off her own two daughters. But Danielle's life takes a wonderful turn when she meets the charming Prince Henry. And there's a note here added, I'm thinking, by one Corinne of this universe, who was a children's literature scholar, that even though this is a Cinderella retelling, and this was actually something interesting that I noted watching it, it removes the supernatural elements and instead it takes place in Renaissance France. So it's kind of leaning into the historical fiction kind of feel rather than, you know, fairy godmothers and bippity boppity boos and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. So we are not going to be able to go over the whole cast, but to give you an idea of some of the main players and the actors who play them, we have Danielle, who is the Cinderella figure, played by Drew Barrymore. To me, at least, this is one of her most iconic roles.
I mean, she was great, yeah.
We have Prince Henry, played by Dougray Scott. He is the Prince of France and suffers from an arranged marriage. We also have Baroness Rodmilla de Ghent, who is the evil-ish stepmother figure, played to perfection.
Oh, she was excellent.
By Angelica Huston. And the two stepsisters, we have Jacqueline, played by Melanie Linsky, and Marguerite, played by Megan Dodds. We also have, for some reason, Leonardo da Vinci, played by Patrick Godfrey.
Yeah, that was so random.
There are some other fun ensemble characters, and we'll mention them if they come up.
Yeah. Kind of jumping right into the conversation, since we're talking already about it being an adaptation of Cinderella and this kind of legacy of fairy tale adaptation that it's leaning into, right?
Mm-hmm.
What about it really, beyond the fact that like it's labeled that when you go on Amazon Prime or whatever, what makes it recognizable as a Cinderella retelling? And are we convinced that it works as one?
So when I'm looking for a Cinderella retelling, the aspects that I'm looking for are pretty shaped, if I'm being perfectly honest, by the Disney Cinderella film.
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh, yeah, because we got like the orphan girl with an evil stepmother, a ball, a shoe, and a prince. Those are kind of like the recognizable aspects. I will say, so putting on my nascent fairy tale scholar hat for a second.
Do it.
Cinderella is a multi-origin fairy tale, not a single origin, and that there are different versions of it from all around the world.
Okay.
And you can't really pin down the first one. So like an example of a single origin fairy tale would be The Little Mermaid, which was by Hans Christian Andersen. Whereas like with Cinderella, we have the Perrault version, which is French. We have the Grimm version, which is German. But we also have a bunch beyond that. So we're going to link to an article in the show notes by Linda Holmes from NPR called A Girl, a Shoe, a Prince, The Endlessly Evolving Cinderella, where she gets into some history of the tale, including an early version in which Cinderella is born from a gourd.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, like the quote of the story is like, woman gives birth to a gourd, which is the opening to the description of an Italian variant of Cinderella.
Woman gives birth to a gourd.
Yeah.
That's funny. It reminds me of dreams that I have when I like give birth to cats.
So I was going to say that I don't need a gourd in my Cinderella, but also like we do got the pumpkin.
We do. There is the gourd. Yes.
The gourd.
The gourd.
We don't have a gourd in Ever After.
She'd be farming though. She'd be in the land. There might be some squash. We don't know. It's funny, a thing that I've realized that I appreciate in my Cinderella adaptations is some kind of connection to ash, right? What Little Ash Puddle was a German, I think, version of the story. So my brain is telling me Little Ash Puddle as like a Cinderella variant of some kind. But I really kind of appreciate when that's woven in somehow. And I think a lot of adaptations will play with how ash and soot is involved. Like here, our Cinderella is reading the book her father got her before he had the nerve to like die the next day. It wasn't really the next day. It was like a week later or something. But like, you know, so
that's still not a lot of time.
It wasn't. But you know, she reads by the fireplace and that gets her all sooty, right? And there's actually a Cinderella retelling that I'm reading right now on Webtoon called Cinderelle, where I don't quite know what the deal is with Ash yet, but one of her potential love interests is named Ash, and her adoptive mother, who's not an evil stepmother, she's actually quite nice, just scolded her when she came home like covered in soot, saying, I thought we broke that habit of yours. So now I'm kind of like, what's the habit? Because I don't fast pass. I don't know yet. But I do appreciate when kind of like ash and soot, right? The remnants of fire is part of my Cinderella story.
So even just from this quick overview then, it seems like there are Cinderella retellings all over the place, which is not a controversial claim on my part. But so that being said, and given that we have some pretty set expectations of what makes something a Cinderella story then, do we think that Ever After works as one for us?
I mean, there wasn't a gourd, but for me, yeah, right. I think it worked. I think in part because it set itself up as, let me tell you the real story of what happened, right?
Yeah.
So even though we remove some of those magical elements that I think are a fun part of Cinderella, right? I do enjoy the animal companion element of the story where like, oh no, suddenly my dog is a footman or what have you, right? That can be a fun magical element. I do appreciate how this one was kind of grounded in a sense of realism, even though, you know, I would argue that it's a historical fantasy, right? But
oh yeah,
there is that interesting sense of Cinderella being an every girl that I think plays into, or I should say Danielle being an every girl that I think plays into an interesting sort of allure, right? I think in a lot of Cinderellas, you know, I remember reading one where like her dead mother was a tree that was helping her do things, and you know, it's not that you're supposed to be like, yes, magical things will happen to me like they happen in fairy tales, but I think there is a way to put yourself, or as a viewer, put yourself in Danielle's shoes that's a little bit more transparent perhaps than in some other Cinderella stories. That makes sense?
It does, yeah. So something else that I like about it, so it is, I will say, very much like a product of the 90s and feels very sort of influenced by, to be honest, by second wave feminism, with Danielle like being like a kick butt, take charge, can take her life in her own hands. She doesn't need anyone to save her kind of girl.
That's true. She did have weapons at many times.
Well, and like I liked that about her, and I do still like that about her. But I do want to acknowledge the sort of context in which the movie came out. But I do also think it is interesting that this particular version of the story did a lot of work to give her a lot of agency in the circumstances that she was living in, because Cinderella is a story that it is very easy for Cinderella not to have much agency. Right. Because like there's often the sort of almost divine intervention of the fairy godmother or her mother's grave or whatever to get her to the ball. And then the prince, she happens to lose her shoe, which the prince finds and then finds her. So you do have to do a lot of work in order to give Cinderella more agency so that she makes choices along the way rather than things just sort of happening to her.
Yeah. I think kind of building on that, something that I appreciated about Ever After was the way that Danielle had a community around her, right? That even though she lost her father very young, by the way, did he have a heart attack? Because he was like,
he grabbed his left arm. Yeah. They were signaling heart attack like real loudly.
Yeah, that's what I thought. But then I was still just kind of like, damn, this man just got on the horse and is dead. But she was not isolated by her stepmother and sisters, right? She existed in community with the people that worked in the house. She existed in community with people in town, right? The fact that Da Vinci kind of becomes part of this larger community, there's a different kind of conversation I think that happens when it's not magical intervention, right? But the intervention of people who love you and care for you to help you make things happen. And I don't think that necessarily like creates agency when it's a community, but I think it's a different kind of conversation that happens when part of the reason people are doing these things is because they love you and they care about you, not because
because these are relationships that she's cultivated over the course of her life. It's not like Well, I mean, with Da Vinci, that's not quite over the course of her life, but it's because she is like the way she is that she like that people want to help her because she is like inspiring.
Mm-hmm. 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 So in thinking about the fact that, as you said, there are many Cinderellas across time and across countries, how do we feel about the fact that this is like French? Which is a really weird thing to say. Not like, how we feel about those French, huh? But the grounding here in like the history of France and the French Renaissance, right? Because towards the end of the film, they do mention like the revolution, right? So this is supposed to be a story that actually took place in the history of France. How do we feel about that, like positioning and situationing?
So, first of all, I do like it. Like, I like it a lot. And as a side note, I studied abroad in France in undergrad. And
baby Corinne.
For part of that, we went to the Loire Valley where there are a lot of chateaus that we toured. And they all feel like they filmed this in like a real French chateau. Not in the Loire Valley, but in like a region over. And that sort of filming on the location and in like a historical chateau, I think, did a lot of work to do a lot of the scene setting that I found very effective and also just could not get out of my mind when I was in France. But that said, there's the Frenchness of it is interesting in part because like they got English accents, except the Spanish who speak Spanish. And also, like, the men who come to talk to the old woman at the beginning are supposed to be the brothers Grimm.
Yes.
So, like, is this the Grimm version when there is, like, the Perrault version, which is, like, the French version of the fairy tale? So there's just, like, a lot going on here that you just kind of have to have a suspension of disbelief.
I mean, because Ever After is an American film, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the most hilarious things to me is when we as Americans make movies, we're like, this takes place in a not America. I know what to do. British accents. Like,
oh yeah.
Like freaking Prince of Persia. Everyone has British accents. Prince of Persia. Like,
I mean, that said, did we need fake French accents? No. Then we would have had a Ewan McGregor Lumiere situation, and that also would have been very bad. But yeah.
I'm sorry. But I will say I was convinced by the scene setting. Right? I really did like the costuming. I liked the way they did the hair. I liked the texture of the film, I think was really well done.
I like that like Danielle is and the other characters do get very like dirty.
Yes.
Like working a farm and like working the land that her stepmother now owns is a lot of like dirty back-breaking work. And she kind of smells sometimes, and she gets dirt under her fingernails, and it feels very lived in that way.
And I think there's an attention to detail in some of that. Like one of the scenes that stood out to me was when they were collecting the honey from the bees, and it was kind of like, obviously I don't know how accurate this is, but kind of the 16th century bee farming where they had the little smoke coming out, the way they were covering themselves, how they were cutting the comb, like all of that was very tactile work that I found really lent something to how I was experiencing the film. But also they made that honey look so delicious. Like, I really wanted some. I have to ask, how did we feel about Leonardo da Vinci being the fairy godmother?
You know, I think I saw this movie young enough that I was like, yes, this makes sense. Obviously, the Mona Lisa would show up at some point.
Of course.
He would just be carrying it around and it would fall in a lake and it would be fine.
Can I tell you, I didn't even need to know that was Da Vinci right away. As soon as the painting went in the water, I was like, no, the art! Is it sealed? Is it airtight? And then when they pulled out the Mona Lisa, I was like, oh, you didn't have to do that. I was just in it for the love of the art. I just supported the artists, you know? Yeah, you know, that was such a weird addition to the story. But, like, I appreciated him as this kind of, like, old inventor man who made boat shoes and had a kite. Like, that's the kind of old person I want to be, you know? Whimsical, helping the youth, tutoring young painters. So I even at this big age, I was like, sure, Leonardo da Vinci. Why not?
Well, and it's no less or no more fantastical than like a fairy godmother.
No. I mean, but also, like, we are talking about the aristocracy. It is very possible that they were like, come, famous painter, come spend the week with us here. Like, that kind of stuff happened. Like, in the great, who did they have? I think they had, was it Voltaire?
Oh, yeah, Voltaire just, like, showed up.
Yeah. So, you know, that's not something that wouldn't happen. Let's make that positive. That is the kind of thing that could happen. So, you know, though he did get attached to Danielle really quickly.
He did. And I mean, they almost have like more of a meet cute than Danielle and the prince. Because she's like taking a bath in the lake.
She was swimming.
She was swimming. Dressed. But it was like to get clean. That was the reason. And then he's like walking in the water in his wooden shoes and like looks down at her and is like, ooh, looks like rain. It's so charming. Yeah, like, no, it's adorable.
It really was. Also, so was the pig, by the way. She's like walking with a big, gigantic pig in the start of that sequence. But you mentioned the prince here and the meet cute. So I'm going to seize on that and move us to talking about the main romance, right? Because this is a romance film. The crux of it is the relationship between Danielle and Henry. And because we both have positive feelings about the film, it feels like ultimately, I am curious if we feel positive about the romance with Henry and about what worked and what didn't. And I will say something really quick up front that not to be petty, but also I think watching this at the age that I am now, I was very, very aware that Dougray Scott was older than Drew Barrymore. And I wasn't like hyper focused on it or whatever, but I was curious enough that I looked up like the difference in ages. So it just was.
How much is the difference?
I think he was born in 1964 and she was born in like 1970 something. So
that's significant.
Yeah, it was a pretty significant age difference. And let me double check so I'm not just like maligning,
maligning the casting director.
But I think, the reason that it stood out to me is that it's a pretty common like thing to have a older actor with a much younger actress. So Drew Barrymore, Dougray Scott. So Drew Barrymore was born in 1975 and Dougray Scott was born in 1965. So they're 10 years apart. And I think the thing that I was curious about was whether we were supposed to be reading that age difference in them, right? If we were supposed to be reading Prince Henry as not significantly older, but like, 5 to 10 years older than Danielle, or if we were supposed to be reading them as the same age, which I was not doing.
I think I just sort of read them as like ageless.
Really?
Not exactly as ageless, but as like young-ish, but of marriageable age.
Interesting.
Which I think is also honestly probably a product of having first seen this when I was like 8.
Yeah.
So I was like,
they're
probably grown-ups. They can get married. I don't know.
Honestly, that's probably it. I mean, I feel like if I had seen this film younger, it might not be something that stood out to me. Because, I was watching, Power Rangers and things. And those people were definitely in their 20s. And I was like, yeah, teenagers with attitude. They're grown-ups, So I think if I saw this at however old I was, I'd have been 12 in 98. If I'd seen this at 11 or 12, I don't think it's something I would have noticed. But seeing it at 38, I'm like, that man older than that girl. And contextually, right, historically, that wouldn't be that wild of a difference. You know what I mean? And it's not like I was reading him like the creepy old man, Le Pieux, who wanted to marry her, that was like, I know I'm as old as your daddy, but I'm well endowed. And I was like, sir, Since I'm like in my auntie era, I was like, absolutely not. Don't let me in this screen. Like, unacceptable. So like I wasn't reading it like creepy like that, but it was just something interesting that I don't know if that was on purpose or not, right?
Yeah, I think, again, like, not to say that we've recovered from this now, but I think it was even more common in, like, the 90s to have these rom-coms and romances with, like, a young woman in her early 20s, which is, I think, how old Drew Barrymore was when they filmed this, and then, like, a gentleman who was, like, 30s, perhaps approaching 40, and that's just the deal.
It's just, I guess, for me, a question of whether it's, like, diegetic or non-diegetic, right?
Yeah.
Which we're not going to know. I just thought it was curious. That doesn't mean that the romance didn't work for me, though.
Yeah.
I want to be clear. I did really enjoy watching Henry and Danielle interact. And I appreciated that in their first meeting, she throws an apple at him and hits him right in the head. And that bruise stays there.
Oh, yeah. They keep that bruise on his face.
Yep. Yep. She beamed him really hard. And I feel bad that my first thought was like, damn, girl got a good arm. I wasn't even like, oh no, the prince. I was like, damn, she got him good. So yeah, it was less of a meet cute and more of a meet with violence. But I liked the way they kind of came together and the way that she was able to respectfully, so she didn't get beheaded, give him like a piece of her mind kind of a thing.
So one of the things I really like about this romance, and that I think is perhaps at the root of some of my issues, is that he immediately, like, when he is attracted to her and interested in her, I think it is especially when he first meets her as she says, Comtesse Nicole de Lancre, but it's when she can, like, talk circles around him. Because she can quote Utopia, because she's there, like, with these ironclad principles about, like, the value of human life regardless of class, that he just, like, finds fascinating as somebody sort of caught in his own, caught by, like, the trappings of his position.
I
will also say there is something very interesting about Prince Henry's situating and being, where he is almost, like, feminized it a little bit by being, like, the royal trapped by an arranged marriage that they don't want.
Interesting.
Like, that's normally what happens to the princess who runs away, but here we have it happening to the prince,
who also runs away.
Who, like, climbs down from his tower. So that is, I think, really interesting. But also, like, if I'm being perfectly honest, I have never found Prince Henry attractive. It's more, I find the romance itself compelling, but I've never been like, yeah, that man, the way I was about, like, Mr. Darcy, as played by Matthew McFadden. So, like, it's just a different, like, I liked his characterization and I love the romance, but I was never like, that guy.
No, I get it. Honestly, I think he's more, I like how he looked now. When I looked at him, I was like, oh, hello. That's really interesting. Well, let me ask you a question, right? Because you're coming to this film having seen it multiple times, right? Whereas I'm coming, like, with a fresh set of experiences. Has how you look at the romance changed? Like, watching it at this point, do you notice or feel differently about it than you did when you watched it? I mean, obviously, you feel differently about it than when you were 8, but, like, how has that, like, interpretation evolved, or has it stayed pretty static? Like, I like it. I'm compelled by it.
So I like it. I still like it a lot. I very much enjoyed my rewatch. Still holds up. But I think there's almost, like, and I don't want to get, like, too depressing about it, but, like, it just doesn't seem, it seems like more of a fantasy to me almost than the Cinderella stuff. Like, this man is so attractive to a woman because she's smarter than him.
Yeah.
That, like, that's what does it for him. That's why he falls for her. That just feels like a fantasy to me.
And then he's like, why don't we open a university that everyone can attend and we'll fund it well? And that feels even more like a fantasy. Yeah, it's funny because I wonder if you were to make Ever After now, right? How would you change the kind of relationship? Not a question that we could answer, right? Because it's super hypothetical. And as you said, there are a billion Cinderella retellings, and I can just go read another one, right? But as you were saying, it's very much a product of its time. And something that I often think about is, okay, well, what happens if you take this out of the time that it's in, right? How does the romance change? But yeah, I'm sorry I asked that question if it was kind of
it's
depressing.
Okay. Well, it's more like, again, being the product of its time when like women were starting to get more education, and like that may have been around the time that like women enrollment and I don't exactly have this historicized, but like that women's enrollment in college was like equaling or perhaps surpassing like male enrollment in university. And like there was an article floating around this summer about how like the more women get into different careers, and as more women go to college, then those things become less economically valued.
Oh yeah.
So thinking about,
I think I read that one. Yeah.
And then also like I do now have on like, oh, this is getting more personal than I normally get, but like I have on my dating app profile that like a picture from my PhD graduation, because if I bring up that I have a PhD and that's too much for someone, I'm just really tired of that happening.
Yeah. I'm shaking my head because this is a bigger conversation than I think we can have right now.
But it feels, and maybe because I was 8 in the 90s or whatever, like it felt like a time of more optimism towards like equality, and we hadn't like quite hit the backlash that we have going on right now.
Yeah. I mean, kind of jumping on that, one of the things that I just looked up is when like the Spice Girls were big, because this very much kind of feels like it's in that girl power zeitgeist kind of the early 90s, that you can be anything you want, a mom and a doctor and a CEO all at the same time. And Wannabe dropped in 96, and Spiceworld, the second album, dropped in 97, and that's when the Spice Girls movie dropped in 97. So like this is very much, I think, in concert with that kind of girl power marketing, right? That was happening at that time period. So yeah, I think that in particular lends itself to the, you know, wow, you're really smart, and I like it when you're smart. So we're gonna fall in love.
Yeah, and that's hot.
Yeah. Being smart is hot, which I still stand by. Okay, I think being smart is very hot. But
I will also say, like, another potential limitation of this film is its lack of diversity. Like, the diversity we got here is that Cinderella is brunette instead of blonde.
So is Jacqueline.
Oh yeah, Jacqueline too. So if you're blonde, you're evil, it turns out.
Little did you know. No, I'm kidding. But you're absolutely right. I was gonna say we did get some Spanish people, but no, you're absolutely right. Again, I do think, of course, we should judge things on their merits, but that's absolutely a product of the time as well, and probably like quote unquote historical fidelity, because you know there was no one other than white folks in 16th century France, of course.
I will also say
that was sarcasm. Obviously, just to be sure.
Something that I think would be, I hope, would be done differently now is the inclusion of the Roma is a little problematic.
Oh, yes. That was
and by that I mean a lot problematic.
I did like their party afterwards where everyone was having a good time and doing a cookout, because I love a good cookout. But yeah, that whole storyline was perhaps a bit, it wasn't good. It didn't age well. That's what we'll say. It did not age well.
So while acknowledging that it did not age well, I will also say what, like, that particular scenario where, like, I mean, it could have just been regular bandits. It didn't have to be the Roma, but like having like her dress. So the point of the story, for those of you who haven't seen it, is when Danielle and Henry are basically walking through like the forest because their carriage has lost a wheel, and Danielle has climbed a cliff to figure out what direction they're supposed to be going. The Roma show up and like have had a bad run-in with Henry before, so they like start fighting, and then they take her dress, which she has taken off because she could not climb a cliff in her dress.
Totally valid.
And then she like when like the Roma have the upper hand. She insists, like, oh, I demand you give me back my dress and a horse since you have deprived me of my escort. And then the leader is like, all right, on my honor, you can have whatever you can carry. And then she carries Prince Henry away, and it is iconic and hilarious.
Yeah, I loved
and
it.
just like a delightful sort of turn that is so emblematic of her character and how she views problem solving.
Yeah.
And being able to make choices that people don't expect.
Yep. And I will also say, because of all that work on the farm.
Yeah, I did believe she could carry him. And she could. She did.
Yep. I was like, I 100% am in on this. I laugh because I could not carry Andrew, but there are other people that I've been with over the course of my life that I could like pick up and hold. And Andrew's bigger than me, so that's not going to happen.
Oh yeah, that there are some pairings where that just simply could if Sabrina Carpenter was playing Cinderella, she's like 5'0" nothing and would not be able to carry like a 6' man.
No,
just would not happen.
It wouldn't.
But in this circumstance, it worked, and then like the Roma laughed and thought it was funny, and they made their peace, and like it worked out. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that part I think has not aged gracefully.
No, I agree with you. So thinking about other characters that interact with our main pair, can we please talk about the Baroness? Like, she was so good, but also layered in a way I was not expecting. And I think this is in part because of the acting, right? I think it was a very well acted role. But from the beginning, I had a sense that she was not going to be your typical evil, diabolical not fairy stepmother, typical diabolical evil stepmother, because of how she actually seemed to care for Danielle's father. And I think she didn't like the farm. She didn't like being there. She didn't like being in the middle of nowhere, right? With all these potatoes and honey and stuff. But I think she really did care for Danielle's father. And I think the way I read this, and you tell me what you think, but in the moment where he died and she rushes to his side to be there, and he kind of like touches Danielle's face and says, I love you before passing, and doesn't say anything to her. I think that wound stays with her for the rest of the film. And I mean, I'm not saying she's right to be jealous of a child, right? But I think I understood where some of her viciousness was coming from because of A, the fact that she fell in love with this man and didn't get to spend the time with him, and B, in his last moments, he didn't save any love for her. It all went to Danielle, which is his daughter, like, obviously, right? But to me, that created this kind of really nuanced situation where our Baroness is holding on to a kind of painful anger that she then takes out on the people around her.
Yeah, I very much agree. Like, especially on rewatch, there's like a whole like beat where he looks at her, like he's on the ground, he's fallen off his horse, he's clearly like dying. Yeah. And she has like run like skirts up. Yeah. And gets there almost as fast as Danielle. And he like looks at her. There's like a long beat, and then he looks away from her and spends the rest of his energy, the rest of his life on his daughter to tell her how much he loves her. And like, yeah, again, you should not take that out on a child. Right. But obviously that moment feels like it is doing a lot of narrative work here to explain. And this almost, I would also say like her character is so interesting here because to me, at least, this movie sort of predates the recent fascination with giving villains backstories and giving villains sympathetic backstories. So, like, we get this before Maleficent. Right. We get this before, like, whatever the Cruella de Vil movie is.
So dismissive.
Whatever. But, like, we get this before we've gone and, like, tried to give these women well, and especially women. But I guess also, I don't know, have we had a Jafar backstory? Trying to, like, explain why they're bad.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, it works better here than it does in some of those cases. Because, like, more recently, especially, I just kind of would be like, can't they just be evil? Like, why has it got to be sad? But in this case, like, I think it is very, very layered.
Yeah.
And very complicated by her role as a now twice widowed woman.
Oh, God. Yeah.
In this society.
Yeah. And then kind of building on that, I think she followed Danielle's father to this place because she likes him. So for me, the line that was so poignant is, you can't leave me here. You can't leave me here. And I was like, ooh, that wording is on purpose, because it's not you can't leave me, but it's like, you've brought me to this place. You brought me to this place to be with you, and now you're abandoning me in this hick town in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, I think it just really set her up to be an interesting interpretation of what the stepmother character is in the Cinderella story. And I mean, she's not a nice person, right? You know, she does evil, devious things,
and cruel things, especially.
And cruel things, yeah. And doesn't show a regard for other people's well-being.
So I think something that is interesting about her is, I don't even know that I see her as evil.
No,
so
I don't see her as evil personally. It's
more that she is cruel and careless with other people.
Yeah.
Including one of her own daughters, honestly. Like, she favors Marguerite to an absurd degree, and then Jacqueline, once Danielle is kind of, like, of no use to her to, like, take advantage of, then she starts taking advantage of Jacqueline. Like, it's... She's so aware of class and her position and, like, of wanting to climb, that, and she will throw away anyone. She will literally sell servants to get there.
Thinking about Jacqueline, because she was one of my favorite characters. I found her to be delightful. I think there's also a bit there, because and I think they did this on purpose, but the actress that played Jacqueline is a little bit thicker than the one who played Marguerite. And the Baroness made multiple comments about, like, oh, you're only at the ball for the food, right?
Oh, yeah, and if one cannot breathe, one cannot eat.
Right, exactly. And there's a little bit of this undercurrent of, like, and maybe this ties back into the girl, not that things were good for thick girls in the 90s, but, like, ties back into that thread of, like, girl empowerment, right? Like, you know, she might not be the quote-unquote stereotypical blonde beauty, right? But she's kind, and
especially, like,
and
the
very
standard
cute.
of thinness in the 90s.
Oh, for sure.
Whack. Like, that was worse, honestly, than some other moments that we've had.
Yeah, the early 2000s were pretty bad, too. But... yeah.
Jacqueline is a lot of fun, I would say. Like, she's interesting in the way that she also becomes, like, a victim of her mother to a degree.
Yes.
But she also, to me, seeing this growing up, was a little bit iconic as, like, the sympathetic stepsister.
Yeah.
Who could see that, like, what her mother and her sister were doing was wrong. She didn't like the way they bullied Danielle. There was also a way in which they framed her for it a lot of the time. And I really liked that, as much as Danielle, or maybe not quite as much as Danielle, but in a different way, that Danielle sort of rose above her circumstances to choose to be, like, a kinder person when she easily could have just, like, gone along.
Yeah, it's interesting, because thinking about this as a story, right? In Cinderella retellings, there is always the choice about whether you're going to have one of the sisters be kind, or if you're going to have both of them be assholes to your main character. And I'm wondering if this story if it wouldn't have went as well if both sisters were mean. I think maybe this comes back to the conversation of community, right? That the Baroness and her two daughters were always on the outside of the little community that Danielle's a part of, with the servants and her friend who wants to be a painter and all that kind of stuff. And Jacqueline is the only one over the course of the film that starts becoming integrated into a community, right? Like she's the one that goes out looking for Danielle when Danielle is at the riverside talking to the prince for too long, right? She starts having her little flirtatious glances with one of the prince's guardsmen, you know, and over the course of the film, we start to see her more and more included in like the communities that Danielle is part of rather than separate, like Marguerite and the Baroness.
Well, yeah, this is because Marguerite and the Baroness consider themselves above them. They would not want to be in community with those people.
Yeah. Which is kind of the point of the whole film, right?
Yeah.
One other thing about the Baroness, another scene that stands out to me is when she and Danielle are in the Baroness's bedroom and she says, you know, I see so much of your father in you. I can see him in your eyes. And then she has to go and make it mean, right? But this moment of tenderness between the two of them was so... It just really jumped out at me at how they're trying to layer this character. Because she still does nasty things. Like, ultimately, you know, she sells Danielle to Le Pew and steals her mother's dress and all that kind of stuff. But there are these moments. Oh, and also was really mean and was like pretty much that she never loved her, she says.
Yeah.
But I wonder how true that is, right? Like, based on the scene when they're talking about her father and that connection between the two of them, like, I think it made me sad that there could have been a kinder person in the Baroness, but she's just consistently made decisions to be a nasty, cruel person.
Yeah, I think that is a fair read.
Yeah. Also, her little thing with her little, what was he, a foot soldier? No.
A page, I think.
Yeah.
Oh boy, that was weird.
That was weird, but just to be sure, she wasn't just playing him, right? Because there was parts of it where I was like, I don't know, I think she's into this. I think she's kind of hot for it. I don't know.
I think that's an Angelica Huston thing.
Oh, okay.
Like, again, like that character I think works especially because of how she plays her.
Yeah.
Like, she's doing a lot of work with her eyebrows.
Bro, yeah, and those were thin 90s eyebrows, too. She was putting in that work. Oh, man. I guess kind of rounding out our conversation a little bit, based on, again, our overall positive feelings, it feels like, with some critiques, right? But would you say, or would we say, ultimately, that this was a successful fairy tale retelling, even though it's grounded in historical quote-unquote truths?
I would say yes, it is.
Seal of approval. I mean, I would also say yes. I liked it. It was fun. And was also very clearly Cinderella, right? So, you know, there was different spins on some of the things. We had Leonardo da Vinci instead of Whitney Houston, say, as a fairy godmother. But I think a lot of those important touchstones of what make this fairy tale special were there. And the overall route of the story and how you feel about it at the end, I don't know. I think it was successful. I will also stamp that with a yes. Indeed. Well done. I was going to say we have solved fairy tales.
Wow. I don't know if that's possible.
It's not.
Fairy tale scholars are some like intense, scary people. So
I will say I've been working with some folklorists on a piece, and they've been delightful. though you have to be very careful about the terminology you use.
They are very specific.
Yeah, and I was like, you're right. I was just looking for synonyms. I'll just use folktale. It's fine. You're right. I'm sorry. I'm just a lowly comic scholar over here. I just make up words. It's fine. But any last feelings about this text?
The last thing I think I want to acknowledge is how snappy the dialogue is.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I think it's a really... And again, this maybe... Not that we don't have snappy dialogue now, but that also feels a little bit like of the time. and that like it's a very tightly scripted film. And I really like the repetition of some of the lines that they have. So like one that Prince Henry is told a number of times is like, you are born to privilege and with that comes specific obligations. Like I think his mother says that to him. Da Vinci says that to him. Does Danielle even say that to him? Like, and that sort of like hammering of like class consciousness, y'all, was I think really interesting to have in this fairy tale retelling built around a royal family in a country that no longer has royal families for revolutionary reasons.
It's funny. It kind of gives with great power comes great responsibility, but more tied to class consciousness. So I just, out of curiosity, looked up the writers of the script, and they're Susanna Grant, Andy Tennant, who was also the director, and Rick Parks. Just shout out to the writers of Ever After for their snappy dialogue. Yeah, because there were some good lines too that I like even texted it to you. And I was like, ooh, girl, that was a good line. Also, fun fact, Charles Perrault is credited as a writer. or it says uncredited, but it's on IMDb. So I found it. Nothing is final until you're dead, and I'm sure God negotiates. Like, what? That was great. That was great. So a lot of snappy lines.
The Baroness dropping fire.
Yeah. So shout out to the writers of the screenplay. Well done.
Okay, I have one more concluding thought.
Yeah, go ahead.
I do think it is also interesting that this film also sort of has an insistence on not exactly soulmates, but on people having a match. Even as it is interested in like advancement and like technology and like discovery, and that like Leonardo da Vinci nonetheless believes in soulmates. And like when Henry like, you know, goes to betray does betray Danielle in front of everybody when he finds out she's been lying about her identity, which we may not have mentioned yet this episode.
Oh yeah, no, we didn't. Right. That was a whole thing.
That was a whole thing. But that, like, he finds out that she's been lying about being a countess in front of everybody when he thinks that, like, he can finally marry her. That, like, Da Vinci insists, like, no, like, she's your match. And when he says, oh, this is when he pulls out the line, like, I am born to privilege and with that comes specific obligations. Da Vinci's like, well, you don't deserve her then. And that, I think... okay, I guess I'm working through a thought here.
Yeah, work it
through. But there's this insistence on soulmates and having a match, but only if you work for them and choose them back. Like, it will not just be given to you.
So, something I'll play with a little bit, because I think the film does this too. I'm not just bringing my own thoughts into it, but there's a little bit of a difference between a soulmate and a match. And I think when Henry starts spinning out about what it means to find a match, and he's like, and what if I get married and then the person dies and then I marry somebody else? Which one of them was my match? Which one of those? And Da Vinci's like, deep breath, boy.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you have to help fate along. I think that was kind of a concession to the fact that having one soulmate, right, is, I'm personally speaking, but also like, you know, that's a hard thing to determine when you live in the real world, right? But this idea of a match feels more like a fit. And an expression that I like to use all the time is there's a pot for every lid, right? And that doesn't mean that lid can't fit on other pots, but just some pots and some lids fit together really well. And that's kind of a little bit how I was taking it, is that they were a match for each other. They fit each other very, very well for a variety of reasons. But that also doesn't mean that if something tragic happened to Danielle, that he would never, ever find another match again. So I think that was a little bit of nuance to that take.
Yeah, I'll buy that.
Yeah. But I think in part it's because Henry had the spin out about it that inserted that into the conversation, which again might also be a factor of the time period that this was in, right? Moving a little away from we hadn't gotten fully away from it, but I think starting to move a little bit away from like the destined tale as old as time kind of lovers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and moving into something a little bit more open and complicated. But yeah.
Something else that I really do like about it is that Danielle doesn't need to be rescued by him. Which, like, well, I mean, it is like a very basic sort of thing, but like I think that was fairly formational for me as like an 8-year-old or whatever. To be like, she did not need to be rescued by the prince. She saved herself.
Can I tell you, girl, I was so worried in that sequence. I was so worried. I was like, this is it. They gonna get her. She's going to the gallows.
For context, this is when she's been sold by her stepmother to the creepy, I don't know, is he a marquis? Whatever he is.
I don't know. Le Pieux.
Yeah, some neighboring rich man who, and there's like a weird threat of like, I mean, of sexual assault, basically, that is left very unsaid to make it still appropriate for 8-year-old Corinne.
Right. It was not subtext. It was text.
Yeah. And that she, like, clearly, like, has been, like, running away. So he has her feet shackled because, like, unless she promises not to run. And that she, like, forces him at sword point to give her the key and let her go because she will not be staying. She refuses to accept the right of her stepmother to sell her.
I was so worried that he was going to be like, here's the key, and then the guards would be on her. Like, I didn't think she was going to walk out, but it was the end of the movie. So, you know, it wasn't the time for another twist, I suppose. But yeah, I can see why that would be formative to 8-year-old Corinne. I think 38-year-old Ayanni was just worried for the safety of a young girl.
That's fair.
But yeah, I think overall we can say we enjoyed these and first watches of Ever After. Would you watch it again?
Yeah, I would, but like I haven't memorized enough that I almost don't need to watch it.
Just close your eyes and like imagine it yourself.
Would you watch it again?
Yes. I feel like it's the kind of thing that I would not seek out to watch again. But if somebody was like, you know what, Ayanni, I'm really in the mood to watch Ever After, I wouldn't be like, no, don't put it on. You know, so.
If we were still in the age of channel flipping and you came across it, you'd leave it on?
Yep, I would. It's a good laundry movie.
Yeah, it's a nice way to put it.
Yeah. Well, excellent. This has been a great discussion of Ever After. I'm glad we did this.
Yeah, me too.
If you watched Ever After when you were 8, or maybe for the first time when you were 38, let us know on all of our social media. We are on Instagram, Blue Sky, and Tumblr, and some other secret places if you look, but everywhere at Sex Love Lit Podcast.
Very mysterious.
It was mysterious. There's a social media account that we don't advertise that we have, but I use. So, you know. And it's actually not that scandalous, but I'm going to keep it a mystery. And we're also, of course, on our website at sexlovelitpodcast.com. Yeah, I think that's anything else we wanted to tell the people before we release them from this episode.
If you have any other throwback deep dives you'd like us to do, please do let us know.
Yes. They're good for like when we don't quite know what to talk about and we want to go digging in the crates for something. So yeah, throwback deep dive, especially if it's one that neither of us have seen before. Well, on that note, this has been Sex Love Literature. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye. Oh my goodness. What was the line? Scrolling. Oh my god, that big-eared chihuahua. Oh my gosh. Girl, we text a lot.
We do text so much.